This is Herschel Gordon Lewis. If you know who I am, God help you. If you don't know who I am, God help you. But what you're watching here or listening to is without your head, and I can tell you that I have contributed to the loss of your head. So thank you for being there.
Welcome to the Station of Decapitation Without Your Head. I am Nasty Neil.
This is Annabelle Lecter.
Yes, and joining us this evening, we have Ray Sager on the line, producer, actor, and hopefully all-around good guy. How you doing?
Yeah, you got it right. I am sort of an all-around good guy. You have to ask some of the crews I work for, but I think they'd say that.
Excellent. To ask about Montag and the Wizard of Gore and how that role all came about for you.
That role came about because by purely an accident. I was broke in New York City, and I had worked with Herschel before as an actor, and but I had started working behind the camera. I was like a floor manager at a PBS station, and then I was doing a film. It was a big feature film on the Conspiracy 7, and I worked on it in Chicago because it was part documentary, and we were following him around the event. I ended up in New York City, where I was supposed to be doing the other half of the film, and at that point, when I got there, I drove there on a motorcycle from Chicago, and I got to New York City, and the film, the producer, who's a very well-known producer, had like 4 plays on Broadway and had done Alice's Restaurant and all that stuff. Oh Calcutta was his, and he went broke. And so I go up to the brownstone in New York, and he's busted. He's like, but he's living the life of luxury. And I'm talking to the production manager at that time, because I was an assistant camera on that show. And I said, well, what's going on? I mean, how could he be broke? I mean, he's living on Park Avenue, an opulent lifestyle. They said they're giving him enough money, but he doesn't go under, because if he doesn't do another hit, they lose everything. So they're just hoping he's going to do something that'll be a hit, but we have to close down the production that I came out there for all the way to New York. So anyway, I called Herschel up. I said, look, things aren't working out here. Do you have anything? And he said, well, you could. I said, I have been working on crew. He said, well, come on out and you can work on crew with me. He said, can you push a dolly or what? And I said, yeah, I can do that, because I've been trained on the film crew at PBS. And he said, okay. So I said, okay, I'll be out there and I'll do this show. He said, he has this thing called Wizard of Gore. And I said, great. And I came out there as a like a dolly grip. Not that we ever pushed the dolly a lot. If you've seen the movies, you notice there isn't a lot of dolly. I think the dolly was there really just to steady the camera. So we never really moved around a lot. But I was there, and we had this guy playing the Wizard of Gore, and he was perfect. He looked perfect. He was a distinguished gentleman with a mustache, white hair, and the second day of shooting, and we're shooting like in this, in this apartment building that's like a high-rise apartment building that's like very exclusive. It was hard to get. Herschel got it through some friends of friends and whatever, and we actually ended up blowing the power in the whole building at some point, which didn't endear us. But we had about 4 days just shooting up there, and this guy that was playing the wizard, he started having a nervous breakdown in front of our eyes. So he's melting down, and what we discovered was, yes, he was an actor at some point, but in actuality, he was an outpatient at a mental institution.
Oh, wow.
So, so we, they don't know what, I mean, we only have this building, we only have this location for so long. Herschel's looking around, talking to Louise Downs, who was like his right-hand woman, and saying, can we recast? Can we find somebody? Who do we see? Da, da, da. And she said, well, Herschel, why don't we use Ray? Because we know him. He's done like 5 films I think I had done 5 films for them at various stages. And as an actor, so they came up to me and they said, well, would you play this part? And I said, well, I haven't even read the script yet. I said, I don't know. And they said, well, I said, well, what will you pay? Now, I'll say that they mentioned 5 times what I was making as a grip. And I have a hunch it's close to that. But Herschel will deny that. He ever paid anybody 5 times what they made. But I was making such little money as a grip, it probably came out to that. I don't think I made more than $5,000 for the whole part, if I was lucky. You'd have to ask him, because a lot of times I'll have stories that conflict with some of his stories, and somewhere in there is the truth. Not because either of us are lying. It's just that, you know, you have a different version of events at that time. I have the same thing on Bloody Valentine with George Mahalka. I ended up directing maybe a quarter to a third of the show because of you know, just running behind, the mine flooded, all sorts of delays, and somebody had to pick up the slack, and then George asked me. So George, there's scenes that I think I directed solely, and you know, and I've met with George many times, and George said, no, you set it up. I came there for that particular scene. So a lot of times it just gets sort of like lost in translation. Mm-hmm. But in any case, yeah, I made more money than I did gripping. So it was, but I told Herschel, I said, look, you cannot give me any new scenes, you know, like the night before or whatever. I said, I can only work a day ahead. So if you, on the day, want to change something up, I said, look, I can't do that. I'll be lucky to know my lines. And, you know, and then I had to figure out, well, how do I play this character? And I started channeling Richard Burton, a bad Richard Burton at that. And that's how I ended up doing it. And, you know, but it was fun. I mean, it was always fun. And it was one of the biggest pictures he had done. He did with a guy called Fred Sandy, who I think owned some theaters and stuff like that. And they had distributed some of Herschel's stuff, but so it was a bigger deal. But it was a very you know, it was an intense shoot, but there was a lot of weird, funny things. I mean, on every one of his shoots, something funny happens, whether it's inadvertent or not. But and luckily, you know, I would say that Herschel has the greatest sense of humor in the world, because we'd be in the midst of tragedy and he'd find a joke. So, and that's rare in this business. You know, he, you know, and maybe he wasn't even joking, but it was sort of the way he said things that he started laughing. You know, because he's very funny.
How did you get hooked up with this guy to begin with? Because you'd said you'd worked on other pictures with him before that. What brought you together?
What brought us together? He had a guy, an editor called Alex Ameripour, and Alex was like a refugee from Iran, which was at that time still Persia, and they were going to draft him, and somehow he escaped to America. And I was at Goodman Theater studying acting and directing, actually, at that point. And we just sort of hung out, and he saw that I would cut some of my theater classes to go watch experimental films that they ran, because we were right next door to the Art Institute. And I'd run into him there, you know, watching some of these films. Like, he loved films. And, you know, so I left school. I think I just finished a semester and quit, like in my 4th year. I don't even think, and I just was like, you know, I had it, and I was walking down the street thinking, well, now what am I going to do? And I run into Alex, and Alex says, well, you know, what are you doing? I said, well, I just quit school. I said, what are you doing? He says, well, we're doing this movie called The Girl, the Body, and the Pill. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. I said, well, you know, are there any parts? He says, as a matter of fact, we need somebody tonight, because somebody didn't show up or didn't work out, or, I mean, it always happened with on Herschel's movies, that you're always by the seat of your pants. So so he said, would you do this? Would you come and do a part? Like, it's 2 lines. And I went, yeah, great, sure, I'll be there. And I was playing a teen tough, so, and I like those roles, and I excelled at doing those kind of heavies. And I went like, oh, this is a no-brainer. So I went and I did it, and Louise, who wrote the script with Herschel, and she liked what I did with the 2 sentences I had, and so they started writing up my part. They started writing it larger and larger through the whole thing. So, and that led to a few other parts, and then I ended up down in Florida with them on Just for the Hell of It. That was like my first big. I think I did Blast Off Girls prior to that. We did that in Chicago and part of it in Cleveland, a nightclub in Cleveland, and that was sort of a secondary part. And then I got the lead in Just for the Hell of It, and I could have had the lead in Motorcycles on Wheels, but I don't know. And there was a girl in Chicago, and I wanted to get back to her, blah, 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 and I didn't do it. And I didn't like, and I was working with Nancy Lee Noble, and I didn't have, particularly good vibes with her, so I went like, this is too hard. Plus, I didn't know how to drive a motorcycle. They found out later after they had already hired me. Let alone I couldn't even drive a car. When I was doing Just for the Hell of It, I was driving around. I lied and said I could drive a car and a motorcycle, because that was the first thing Herschel asked me. He said, well, can you drive a car and drive a motorcycle? I said, oh, yeah. So every night I'd take the one rental car we had, and I'd go out on the causeways in Florida, and I'd be driving around, Well, I mean, in Florida, it's sort of like California. There's nobody on the highways after 10. So it's pretty easy driving, So I figured, okay, well, I mastered that. And I had a scene coming up where I had to drive. And it was one of those scenes where I've got a gang with me, and the gang is 2 or 3 of the guys of the gang are sitting, how they used to on a convertible. They'd sit not in the back seat. They'd sit over the back seat. So, and the idea was we were going to come roaring around a corner, and we were going to throw some whitewash on this teacher that we hated. And so they had this big pail of whitewash, and and Herschel says, are you ready? I said, oh yeah, I'm ready to go. And he says, well, you got to floor it when you come by, because you got to take this corner really tight. And I said, yeah, no problem. So I'm revving it up, to show I really know what I'm doing. And he says, okay, action. And I throw the car in reverse. Now there's this whitewash all over everybody, just like it took about an hour to clean up. It's in the seat, it's in the ashtrays, it's in everything. So anyway, Herschel comes up to me and he says, Ray, why did you do that? And I said, oh well, I always start a car in reverse. He said, well, we're going to go again. He says, don't do that this time.
Yeah.
So that was
yeah, but that's how he handles stuff. He didn't yell at me. He didn't explode with anger. He just said, he was just very wry. He just said, well, don't do that next time. So, but that's how we encountered. Then I did some other parts. When I think it was after Wizard of Gore, went to Oklahoma and Texas with him. We did 2 features, one in Texas, one in Oklahoma City, and one in San Antonio, Texas. And we had just like crazy times. We were doing a scene, and I was ADing it, and Herschel was directing, and a big extra scene. And we were getting everything. I lucked into a deal. I went down there. I had nothing. And his contact at Herschel said, well, look this guy up. He's going to give you everything. This guy, once he realized we were doing some low budget feature, he thought we were doing the Alamo, but this guy just sort of like backed out. And I'm like, and I have to set up everything for Herschel. He's coming down within like 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm doing the casting, I'm doing finding locations, I'm doing, setting up the extra equipment, the vehicles, the hotel rooms, the whole 9 yards. And I've got nothing. And it's like 2-3 days before he shows up, and I have nothing. I don't have anything. And I have done some casting. I've got a few people, in mind that I want to show him. the star of the show is a guy called Claude King, and Claude King did a thing called Wolverton Mountain, which was a big hit record. It sold, I mean, in its day, it sold over like 6 million copies of this record, but he never did anything else. But he now toured with a country western band, and he was a star of the show. He couldn't act to save his life, but he was a star of the show. And so I call up. Finally, I'm totally desperate. I've been listening to this country and western station every morning on my way into an empty office, and I finally said, maybe if I call him up and I tell him we got Claude King, maybe it means something to him. So I call him up and I said, oh, I'm here in town and we're doing a movie and I could use some help. I said, he says, well, who's in the movie? And I said, well, it's Claude King. And he said, you got Claude King in a movie? He said, well, we're going to roll out the red carpet for you, boy. So, and they did. They gave us everything. They gave us incredible locations. I mean, high-end locations. They gave us their television station. They gave us announcers that they had on their radio and TV stations but former actors. They just came through on every level. So it was called K-Box, but I don't know if they're still up there in Texas. But so Herschel comes down and it's all set up, and he says, "Wow, that's pretty good." So there was one part we couldn't find that I was trying to cast out of there, and kind of a slime ball guy, and so finally, and I didn't really want to play it, but Herschel said, "Well, he says, well, why don't you play it, Ray?" I said, I really don't. I don't act anymore. I don't do that anymore. He says, well, I'll buy you a new suit to wear in a part, and you can take it with you. I went, oh, well, that sounds okay. So anyway, he let me pick out my suit. He never liked it, but he let me pick out a suit, and then we went and we did the show. But the thing when I was ADing a scene there, but a big extra scene, and he was directing, was that the Teamsters come on set. Now, we're non-union totally. And Herschel says, when they say, you got to talk to us about joining the union. And so he says, yeah, we'll do that. I just want to finish this scene. We're going to have up a meeting. Our day off is tomorrow, and we're going to come by and see you. We'll set up this thing. And so we're in the office, and these guys are like, they're like real, what you're expecting down there, shit kickers. And they're in bib overalls. And Herschel, when they say, well, you got to join this union, Herschel looks them in the eye and says, what's a union? And they say, well, a union. And then they're explaining this to him, and then he says at the end of this whole thing, he says, this sounds really good. He says, my boss in Chicago makes all the decisions. I'm going to contact him, and I'm sure he's going to go with you guys and putting the union on this show. So meanwhile, we get out of there, and I said, Herschel, what are we going to do? He says, we're going to hide all the trucks and change hotels and change the schedule. So that's what we did, and we shot. We never saw those guys again.
Oh wow, that's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. How important is it to be in the business to be able to get away with stuff like that?
Well, you know what? It's not as easy as it used to be. I mean, This is a much more sophisticated environment in terms of dealing with things. I mean, when I came to Toronto, I did non-union movies here for into the early 90s. And then they just took everybody that could, lift a hammer, and they drafted them into the union with the proviso that we take you to the union, but you can't work non-union. So there wasn't anybody to draw from. And the problem with doing non-union, people ask me today, well, can you do non-union? I say, yeah. I said, look, I like to fire people. I said, and I said, I can't fire them in a non-union situation because who am I going to bring in to replace them? So a lot of times I'm dealing with people that are costing us money, but I have to keep them on. So where I would usually get rid of them, So it's a double-edged sword. The good news is you get people for peanuts. The bad news is you're paying a price, and sometimes you're paying way more than if you pay them like a a good rate and got better people. So it's a real trick. It's a, I know a lot of the young indie guys are doing it, and a lot of them are working with friends. And I think in certain ways they can do it because the equipment, in spite of what they tell you in Hollywood, the equipment costs have really come down in terms of like even here. Lighting is really hurting because you can't get the cameras are so good now. You don't need lights. I mean, because I have a lot of people I mentor here, and we'll be in a restaurant. And they'll say, "Well, what would you do like this?" I said, "Nothing. We're lit. Look." I said, "Look at where the light's hitting your face." I said, "We're lit. We could do this." I said, "The cameras are so fast right now. We could do this." So it's a little bit of a different deal than it was, and it's always changing, and it's continually changing. And interview just like opened the door to a whole new big sea change. So every day now, I mean, there's some new change.
What made you decide to leave acting and pursue more of the producing and directing work?
I think I was one too many cattle calls, and I lost my passion for it. If you don't love acting, I have no idea how you could do it. I mean, love it. I mean, love it like it's a sickness, like it's an addiction. And when I noticed that I lost that, now I still do some movies for Herschel and all, and I still go out and every once in a while. I just did a thing for Lee DeMar, Smash Cut. I did a day on that, and Herschel was in that too, but I didn't run into him. But when you lose that love, that passion, well, it's a thankless business. I mean, you don't want to be doing that. Very few people. I was fortunate, thanks to Herschel, I made money at it. I mean, and actually, I did a lot of stuff with her. I did editing with Herschel, thanks to Alex. He trained me as an editor, and so I was like, I had a lot of employment through Herschel while I was in Chicago. Plus, I started doing sound, and I started doing others. And I actually, once I left acting, and I went to PBS in Chicago, and I worked there as a floor manager for about 2 years. And then I went and I learned. I was on the floor with their TV cameras and the studio stuff, but I also went out on the film crews, and I learned. I was an assistant camera, and through people there, I learned how to run sound, and so I was. And that's sort of when you're in a smaller market, like Chicago was a smaller market, or like it's between New York and LA, you end up having to learn how to do everything, and then you sort of find out what you excel at. So I did sound for quite a while. The sound on a couple of horror films. One horror film in particular, which wasn't very good, was Bill Rebane, and Bill had done some stuff like that out in Wisconsin. But yeah, I just and I just gravitated to that as opposed to, I didn't want to leave the business. I just wanted to do the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think having some knowledge in all the different aspects of making films helps you, as a producer and in other areas?
I don't. I think I don't know if it's as relevant. I think that in answer to that question, I think that for me, it's work to know everything that everybody does on our show, because in producing, you can talk with knowledge. You can say, well, what if we do this? Or, that doesn't really work that well. Why don't we do, and you can talk with authority. So it shortcuts a lot of stuff and a lot of things where people try to tell you, no, that's not going to work, blah, 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 and it will. So I think that was the greatest asset in learning all that stuff. Whether you need that now, I just attended a special effects a forum here, and one of the things they stressed was that, and this is Mr. X. Mr. X is one of the biggest effects studios out there, and he said we don't want anybody coming in here and saying, well, I know how to do green screen, I know how to do color correct, I know how to do eraser. And he says, I want to know, what is this one thing that you do, and you do it better than anybody. So if it's faces, then that's what you'll do. But don't come and you're not, as a generalist, he says, I'm not hiring you. So, now I think there's much more of you have to be more of a specialist.
You'd mentioned watching experimental films and, the different movies you worked in. Are you yourself into horror films?
Not as much as my daughter, who's very into the the Italian. I don't even know what they call it, but there's a particular. They now have a particular word for the Italian horror films. I have a few favorites, stuff that really. Mostly I'm very. I'm terrified when I see certain films. I was doing a show in Newfoundland, and I had to take two of the women from the office with me to go see Paranormal, the sequel.
Mm-hmm. Paranormal Activity.
Because I knew I'd be totally freaked out.
Wow.
So that's where I land with my fear factor and regarding. It's easy to make them. It's not that. It's not that easy to watch them. The one that really got me, the first one that really, really got me was, Halloween, I would say. And then after that, when I first came to Toronto, a friend and I went to see Texas Chainsaw. And I swear I just about hid under a seat.
Yeah, those are fantastic movies to be scared by, as we know those are classics. And so are you tend to be more freaked out by the more realistic human-based serial killers, or do you have any ghost issues or monster things?
No, the ghost and monster stuff doesn't get me when I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, for instance. We built for Prom Night 2. We built an upside down room. I did that fire sequence. I was directing a lot of second unit. A lot of these horror films I directed second unit because nobody else would do it, or I had this sort of rule if we couldn't get the effects right away, we just move on. We just say, okay, that's second unit. They'll pick it up. So, and that was actually on Bloody Valentine. What happened was a lot of we had a lot of unfortunate events on that show. One of them being that we were shooting on an actual mine, and the gas alert went on, and we couldn't get back in for 2 or 3 days until it was safe to get back in. So we lost time there, and so I ended up doing a lot of the special effects stuff. We just got the dialogue stuff, and I could go and do a lot of special effects stuff that actually did not end up in the original Bloody Valentine because of censorship issues. Because
really?
I guess we did it too well. We did it too well. There's a lot of, maybe one day they're going to release George and I would love it if they would release the the original director's cut, which had. Mm-hmm. We had Helen Udy going through that shower smoke and blood coming out of her like you wouldn't believe. And, the Bermans were just really getting their name in terms of special effects artists at that time. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the stuff I did not end up on the screen. I did 2 weeks worth of work, but just not all of it was there.
Is that frustrating to work on something and then it gets, cut out of the movie?
Well, you sort of, you expect some things, but it's just the reasons why it's cut out. It was cut out there because for the infinite wisdom of Paramount at that time was, we're going to release this on Valentine's Day. And, and I'm thinking, it's a couple of days. People aren't going to want to go see a horror film about people getting killed by a serial killer in a mine. It's not what's the thinking behind this? And then they toned it down to make it as palatable as possible for that audience, but I don't think we ever got the audience we could have. I know that everybody I've talked to, and I'm not just saying this, say that it is superior to the original. But the original is superior to the the Second Coming one that they made, even without all the effects in it. So I just think we missed an opportunity to get an audience at that point.
Yeah. Not to see you
would
here.
you be able to get that together and maybe have a chance if there was enough hype about it? If everybody was demanding,
if the footage would probably still be with I don't know, John. I haven't talked to John Dunning in a long time, and but he had it at Cinepix, which I think he sold Cinepix to somebody. So you never know where. I mean, you'd have to end up going back to the original neg. And that's always a real crapshoot these days because you don't know who the heck's storing them. And I think that would be the bigger issue in terms of George would love to recut it, I'm sure, but I for free. But I think it's more like finding the material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had George on the show actually on Valentine's Day. I'm not sure what year it was. It was a few years ago. But at the time, they were talking about doing the remake, and he actually hadn't heard about it until we brought it up on the show. And then it was...
that they were doing it.
Yeah, that they were even going to remake the movie. And I agree, though, the original one is much better.
Yeah, and I mean, even without having all, we had, and there's just a lot of... the only thing that was stumped me a lot was I had to shoot the heart... The pumping heart in the Valentine's Day box. I kept shooting that, and that was the only thing that John Dunning, I get a note from him. Could you reshoot the heart? Could you put a little more blood? Could you put a little less blood? Could it pump a little faster? I mean, I must have shot that. So I used to carry the box with a heart with me. So anytime we had some downtime and we were, waiting for another setup or something, I say, hey, grab the heart. We're going to shoot the heart in the box again. I must have shot it like 8 times or something.
Yeah. You said, there was a lot of difficulty shooting in real mines, but do you think that also added a lot of atmosphere to the finished film?
Well, you know what? It's it's low ceilings. It's absolutely filthy. You take an elevator to get down. It's not like you're climbing stairs, like you're taking an elevator. It was in a mining town in Nova Scotia, and it was difficult shooting in that town because that town wasn't really on the map yet. It was just a mining town, and the people were really great to us, But, their idea of a balanced meal was bread, rice, and potatoes. And when I ended up taking over second unit directing on it, because George asked me and then John Dunning asked me, and I said, all right, okay. I didn't really want to do it. I hadn't directed in a while. I mean, I did Bullies. I did stuff on Bullies after that. I did a whole sequence there. So like on a lot of these horror films, I'm uncredited as second unit director because I never really thought, I had sort of walked away from directing a long time ago, so I wasn't really, all that into it. But I remember on Bloody Valentine when they came to me, and the first thing I had to direct was the sequence where it's the mine yard and the miners get into their cars at the end of their period, and they're like, they bullet out of the yard. And one of the actors, Paul Kellerman, could not. I didn't think he could drive, but I went to the stunt guy, and the stunt guys assured me they'd seen him drive and that he can drive, even though he doesn't have a license. And I went, well, it's a little scary. It's the first shot we're doing, and I've got like 3 cameras out there, and it's a big deal with lots of cars, a lot of choreographed moves, and everything like that. And when I give the cue, the action cue, the cars start like bulleting out as they should. But I always tell them, make sure you're like no more than 30 miles an hour. So all of a sudden there's this car coming out at 60, and it's Kelvin driving it, and he's like hot dogging it. And the next thing, I see a body flying through the air. And I'm going like, well, we didn't really stage it that way, that some body goes flying through the air. So what happens was he hit somebody, and put him in the hospital. Now, the guy that he hit was the local I can get you anything go-to guy in that town. And I mean, he can get you anything. So it was the last person you wanted to hit because this guy was connected everywhere. Anyway, so I was horrified, and I didn't want to continue directing. So I went to George. I said, George, I said, this is my first shot I do after, a couple of years not directing, 2-3 years. I said, and it's a disaster. I said, I can't go back and do this. And he talked to me, and John talked to me, and they said, you got to come back. And part of it was I said, I'll only come back if I can go to, there's a restaurant that's the only decent restaurant, and it's 30 minutes away. And they close like at 9 o'clock at night. And I said, we have to be able to wrap on time that we can make that restaurant and get the last meal. Because it was an epic French chef, and and the crew loved it. Anyway, so what happened was I put off going to see the guy in the hospital for maybe a week or something. And finally I went, I got to go see him. So I go see him. And as soon as I walk in the door, he starts going, oh, my God, it's such pain. It's good to see you, Ray. And I went oh, my God. And I'm devastated. I'm thinking, this guy won't walk again. So I leave the room, and I tell him to, just hang in there and all that. And when I talked to the nurse outside, she says, I said, well, how bad is he? How long is he going to be here? It looks, it must be pretty bad. And she said, there's nothing wrong with him. He's got a bruise on his leg. We're trying to get rid of him. And that's why I went, oh yeah, well, that's, his name was Tiger. I said, well, that's Tiger. So anyway, they ended up with a lawsuit, and they settled up with him, and he made few good bucks out of the whole thing. And that's what happened. I'm glad I went back and directed some stuff for George. So all worked out.
Yeah. Now, as someone who is scared of horror movies, does that help or hinder you at all when you're actually filming them?
It helps me in this sense. I know what scares people. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of younger people coming to me and saying, well, I want to make this horror film. And a lot of them come to me with this, it's going to be psychological horror. And I'll go, don't do that. I said, A, you're probably not going to get it right. I said, C, or B, the thing is that it has to scare people. The chances of psychological horror, because everybody's psychiatry is different, of really scaring them is pretty remote. I said, just make a scary movie. I said, but you have one thing you've got to do. This is the only thing. It's not the lighting. It's not even the acting. It's you got to scare people. And if you don't scare people, your movie's a failure. Because there's only one reason to be. It's like a comedy. If people don't laugh at a comedy, then you have no movie. There's no movie there. Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing I've ever seen. I've studied how you set certain things up to make them, to make them scary. Hopefully you also have a good story, that hasn't been done 50 times, and you have some really good actors, who can sell it. But there's certain formula kind of things that work or don't work. Like make sure it's a woman in jeopardy, especially if you're doing it in America. The guy in jeopardy when they did one of the paranormals, and it was a guy in jeopardy, or it was the same people that did, and I actually saw it, and it was him, and he was going after his son, and blah blah blah, and I went, well, this isn't scary at all. If they reversed and made it the mother going after the son, that I would buy. Mm-hmm. That would have made a better film.
What are some modern films that you think have successfully done this and been true horror film?
As a horror film?
Yes.
Let's see, I'm trying to you know what I really liked? My daughter gets me to see some of these. Was The Inside. I like The Inside, which I thought was really good. I like the American version over the Swedish. which is unusual. And I also like the one about, and I can't remember, some French guys made it about the woman in the house who's pregnant, who is being stalked by another woman. What the heck was the name of that? Oh, it's a brilliant film. You got to see it. It's done like in one place. It's done in one location, basically, and she's pregnant, and this woman's going to kill her and her child. So it's really a two-hander with a cop that arrives and stuff like that. But there's hardly any cast in it. But God, that's terrifying. I mean, and everybody I've talked to found that really terrifying. I liked a lot of the Asian. I did one called The Marsh, and I couldn't quite get the director on board, but we did watch a lot of, Rang Yu and all that stuff. We did watch a lot of that, to get, and I'd point out, well, this is what works about this, and they weren't particularly well shot, but they were really terrifying. Even the one about the sisters, I thought was, which was even a little bit more psychological, was actually pretty terrifying. So it was a Japanese, but I don't remember the name of that one. But those were the modern ones. I'm not a big Resident Evil. I love the game. I've played the Resident Evil game, and actually, the game is actually scarier than the movie. Especially, various editions of it. So they did like five Resident Evil games, and like the second one is particularly disturbing. So some of these are but I haven't seen, other than the paranormal series, I haven't seen many, but really, and I went to see, I was doing another show in Calgary at the time, and what was it? The big thing where everybody shoots themselves.
Blair Witch?
It was Blair Witch.
Okay.
So I heard about the Blair Witch. I'm doing a kids show, and I heard about Blair Witch, and I said, well, I want to go see this. It was about the second week, and I go shooting in Calgary, and so I go into this one area, which I thought was kind of a college-y area, and I thought everybody there was like college kids, but they weren't. They were like just younger people, like under 35 or something. And I'm watching, and believe me, you could not hear people breathing in that audience. Usually I was expecting, okay, people go to horror films, they talk a lot. Just one part of it is to relieve attention. And you couldn't hear people breathing. It was like that. It was that impactful. And outside not really having a great ending because it was a student film. Let's face it. They didn't, but up until that moment, it was a shocker. And so that was probably, and I would I start pounding on stuff like that. I said, look what these guys did for 20,000. I like that, the original Paranormal I saw, and I turned on every light in the house and watched it. It wasn't, but I kept saying, well, why is this working? Well, it's working because if you look at the way he shot it, every shot is to a degree off. There isn't, and look at the poster art. It's just a slight, we call that it's a little tilt in the frame. And it's not even that noticeable, but it's because
something that your eyes are probably not used to seeing. So there's something going on in your brain saying this is not right.
Yeah, it creates, what it did was it created incredible tension out of nothing.
I believe that's something Hitchcock used to do, would just tilt the camera a little bit for like Psycho and whatnot. But yeah. Yeah, and I think Psycho was like, I think they were that was the masterpiece. Not as well received as it should have in its time, but certainly it became, and I'm actually glad. I like the way they've done the series. I think that's really it's a cool idea that they've
done a prequel.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question about Blair Witch. Now, there was really the birth mainstream of the whole shaky cam sort of thing. And I know so many people just could not even watch the film. Do you think it was worth it for them? I mean, obviously you have to have it from that perspective of having a home camera. But to that level of it jostling around, do you think it hurt the film?
Well, you know what? Nobody walked out of the theater. That's how I judge things. I just wanted to see Interstellar for the second time. I mean, it's a long movie. It's almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
And it's not an action movie. It's not. I was actually maybe poorly marketed because they didn't want to say, "Hey, it's really actually pretty cerebral." But you know, and I'm there and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is, you know, I know it's a long movie. I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and I'm seeing if anybody nobody's flipping on their phone, nobody's doing anything. Everybody's just absorbed in the movie. And nobody's even going to the bathroom. And I'm going like, well, this is pretty interesting. And then when I get up and the lights go on, I look around and see who's the audience. Well, the audience is all under 30. Mm-hmm. They're all geeks. You know, the male and female, almost half and half mix. You know, probably out of college or whatever, but they were totally into it. And that's how I judge it. Like, are people into it? Now, I wouldn't say that the talking quotient is a bigger factor, because I did a movie called, I was an assistant director, first one I did in Canada, called Funeral Home. Mm-hmm. And Funeral Home was originally called Cries in the Night. So I'm doing another movie, and we're like going across America, and I was working with Paul Lynch, who did a lot of, he did the first Prom Night. I didn't do it with him, but he did the first. But I did humongous with him as an assistant director. That's how I met him. And then we actually co-produced a feature that did very well together. And anyway, so when we were doing cross country, part of it was like I could fly home from Arizona. I was in the Grand Canyon, or you could go with Paul, and he's going to do pickup shots all along going across America, because that was going to be what would fill in the gaps in the show. Was that we would do these, you know, establishing shots, and we had some extras. His girlfriend was one of them, and she put wigs on and whatever, and costumes, and we'd go to various places that were recognizable, like Tucson. You know, we went to, where we go? We went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, places like that. So we did a lot of shots on the way, and we finally ended up in Philadelphia. So Paul and I go to a movie, and he wants to go see Ms. 45, which is a really good movie, actually, by Abel Ferrar, who doesn't do it enough. But he's fighting with his girlfriend. We go to this movie theater, and everybody in there is black. I mean, we're the only white people in this movie theater. It's an afternoon, and it's almost, you know, half full, and you can see us because we're reflecting light. But then they run the second feature they run is titled Funeral Home, but it's actually Cries in the Night. I didn't know it was retitled. So I thought, well, I'm going to watch this movie and see what the reaction is, you know, because you can. I like to go to movies. I would like to listen and see. Okay, is it absorbing? Are we talking about the movie? Are they talking about their private lives? What are they talking about? So the people. And this even happened in Ms. 45. The people in the audience would talk to the screen. And so when, you know, Grandma comes around with the axe, you know, they're yelling out, "Watch out!" So, and I remember I had a screening at Lee DeMar has a rep theater, and he's a big fan. You know, he has all my movies, actually. Lee's a great guy. And he just, thank God, just picked up the interview for his theater, which I, you know, called him right away. I said, please try to get somebody to give you this show, and he got it. But we screened Wizard of Gore, and I did a commentary. I don't know if that's on YouTube or not. He may have posted it, he may not have. But anyway, the people were so reverent about this movie. I'm going like, you know, we had a lot of fun making it, and it was just a hoot. But don't, you know, it's not the Mona Lisa here. And I talked to the audience. I said, look, if you were a black audience, I said, you'd be like like yelling at the screen and throwing things. I said, you'd be alive. I said, we're not making high art here. So anyway, they were kind of, because they're Canadians, they were a little offended by that because they thought I was doing a racial slur. But it wasn't. I really enjoyed the fact that I'm sitting in an audience and they love Funeral Home. I'm going like, well, that, the work we did paid off. These people loved that movie. Mm-hmm. So, and that's really it. That's what you're looking for. That's sort of what, tells you, where you a hit or a miss is what is the audience reaction? And the audience, they don't lie. If they're bored, they walk out. They walk out, or they flip on their phones, or they're texting, or they're doing whatever, but they aren't into the movie.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned
and the only, pardon?
You go on. Sorry.
Go ahead. Well, the only reason we do these things, and I keep telling this to everybody I work with, is that we're doing it for, and even I have a project now that I'm in that is beyond in development actually versus director attached, and we're going to flog it in at NAFTE. And it's a big sci-fi series TV show, and but I say, look, the only thing I care about is the audience. I don't care, did we do this? Did we do that? Was it right? Does it look great? Does it, is that the right edit? Did the audience get it? That's the only thing. There's no other thing to think about but the audience. And when you write that script, that's the best thing to think about, is think about who's going to watch this.
So I have two connected questions.
Mm-hmm.
For yourself, what is the movie you remember having that strongest reaction to, and have you ever walked out of a film?
Where have I walked out? I've walked out of a few, not many films. I'm always wanting to see, okay, well, what didn't work about this? What is it I didn't like? Let's see. The strongest reaction I ever had to a film was Star Wars. And I must have seen it 7, 8, 10 times because, that nobody had done anything like it. Like, it was like breakthrough. And, and I also admire Lucas that he went and he kept, he remastered it digitally. He kept fucking with it. And I think that's what's really, he's a guy who could easily just sit on it, but he doesn't. He keeps moving ahead. He's going to be he'll probably be working on horror films for Oculus, which is actually my dream, is to make horror films for Oculus. And films I've walked out on, it must be a few, but it's not many. I know there's musicals I've walked out. I walked out on Sweeney Todd and stayed to watch the whole.
Really?
And I loved the film. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a production. It was, I guess, a good. I walked out. I just said, "This is ridiculous." Even Into the Woods, which has the greatest opening I saw on Broadway, has the greatest first act ever. I was like crying. I was like totally moved, and then a very lukewarm second act, which Rob Marshall, when he did the movie, totally bridged it together. So that the emotional impact at the end of a movie is pretty strong. And I thought, well, he went above the original material in that respect. So I like to see that. I'm just trying to think of anything I walked out on. Probably I didn't go see the Marsh, so I didn't walk in on it. I didn't just I produced. I was one of the producers on it, but I was always against the way it was, written, the way it ended. I thought it was, I didn't want to be attached in that way. The only thing that I got, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it is a horror film. But what I enjoyed about it is that I built a swamp in a studio that we used for about 5 days of shooting. So we had a big chase through the woods into the swamp. So I was doing this into the, building the woods in this. I always wanted to build a forest in a studio. And so maybe I'm sure others have done it, but I thought, well, it was interesting to see how Rob Marshall did. And I'm going like, well, sort of the same way. And that was very satisfactory in building the swamp. And, because we had to have a big tub that, you could sink into it and like that people went into the swamp. And, pretty fun. I'm still working on what movies I walked out on. I mean, I would say the first sci-fi movie that ever got me was, but still, I think about it, is Forbidden Planet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was like in terms of, and that was horrifying. There was something about that monster. That was really a futuristic movie like they haven't done, and that monster that you could only see when you threw electricity on and all that was a pretty, considering they had zero CGI special effects kind of things, everything was more practical. That was pretty breakthrough at that point. And inspired a lot. When I talk sci-fi with people, it inspired a lot of things. I mean, there isn't a lot. The sci-fi thing I'm doing is takes place in 2300. It's on a space station, and it's basically Casablanca in outer space. And that's all I can tell you about it. But anyway, we're looking for, it's going to be expensive, and we're looking for various broadcasters to go along with it. But now is the time, because everybody's been looking for Galactica, and now it can come back.
Yeah. Well,
so we have to do better than Galactica. Pardon?
So what do you have? What do you have for a title for that?
No, well, we have a working title called Resistance, but I don't think that'll be the final title. I think that was. It had an original title of Avalon, and I went like, well, the writer's brilliant. The writer actually worked his way up from the writer's room on what's the name of the show? It's a horror show. It takes place. It's a Stephen King thing. It takes place in a small town.
The Kingdom. Is that it?
What is it?
Was it The Kingdom?
No. It's shot in Nova Scotia. I'm just blanking on the title right now, but I don't watch it. I'm not a big fan of the show, but he ended up he's played 5 seasons, and he ended up being a writer on the show. The guy that created this sci-fi idea, Josh Brandon, and he's a genre fan. He likes them all.
I just want, before we get back to the horror, I did want to know your thoughts on Episode 7, since you're a big Star Wars fan. Which is
I'm looking forward to Episode 7, yeah, because that's Abrams doing it, and I'm a big Abrams fan. So I go watch anything Abrams does, and believe me, even his failures are kind of interesting, and he's had some failures, especially on television, but at least they keep investing in him because he has more hits than misses. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it, and he is very Steven Spielberg in terms of his, he was an apt pupil for Spielberg, and he does a lot. I think he does a lot of stuff better than Spielberg, actually. So, I think that he does well. So I'll definitely go see it. Yeah. I mean, I've seen all of them, so I'll definitely go see it.
Yeah. I liked his Star Trek. I don't know if you call it reboot or whatever, but I liked his Star Trek. I didn't like the second one too good. But I
saw his Star Treks were fantastic. I thought the casting was great. I thought those two. I mean, Chris Pine and all. I'm not a big Chris Pine fan. I'm not even. And the other guy.
The guy who plays Spock is really the star. Yeah, he's fantastic in it. But I thought it was really smart how they did it, because it's not necessary. It's not really a remake. It's still in the same storyline, but it's in they go back into they go into an alternate reality, which I thought was a really smart way to do it, because I think it keeps everyone happy.
Yeah, absolutely, I think, and he does work a lot on the science. I mean, one thing that probably hurt Interstellar is that it is scientifically accurate. So. It's where do you take the liberty? Where do you take that jump? Where do you take the liberty? And maybe they were too faithful to real science and real law of physics. But I've watched a making of the last Star Trek, and they had a think tank, a very well-known physicist on that. Working through what is possible, what's not possible. So I mean, he does think it out.
Mm-hmm. Back to your horror movies. I want to ask, how long was it till people started to, as far as you knew, like really talk about Wizard of Gore? Was it after VHS came out, or was it DVDs, or was it once the internet started?
Well, I think it was the internet. I mean, I don't even think I had a computer till 2001. I think I got my first laptop as I was working on a show called MythQuest, which was like, it was awesome. It was going into the past myths and reworking myths, and with hero and heroine. It was really a well done show. It was just financed by German money. It was very expensive. It was like $2 million an episode at that time, and that was 2000. And it was PBS had money in it, and German television, and CBC up here in Canada. And then all the German money fell out in 2001, and that was 2/3 of our budget. So the rest was history. But it was I'm proud of the show. I'm proud of the work we did on the show. I think it was really a well done series. But I think I started noticing, and people all around me started having laptop computers. Those Apple colored computers and all. And I thought, well, I better get in on it. So anyway, so I go and I check on Google, and I've got 50,000 places where my name is mentioned. And this is like in 2001 or something. This is it was because every place that one of Herschel's movies was selling as a sales site and VHS or something, I was one of the movies and my name was there. And so Google led you to that, led from there to me to back, it continually linked. So I went so I still didn't come out. I never publicized it. I never pushed it. I had gone to see Herschel in Florida, I think in the somewhere in the 90s, when I was living down there, early 90s, like 93, 92, 93 or something like that. And he was talking about, he was living large. He had 5 beautiful cars, and he lived on a lake, and it was right near Fort Lauderdale. So I found him, and I had lost touch with him over years. And anyway, so when I I'm trying to think of the trend that I was going on. What was the question you asked me again?
When did you realize, that Wizard of Gore?
Oh, that's when I realized. So even after having met with him and all this, it didn't occur to me. Hey, at that point, his movies weren't really in cult status yet.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't start. I think what pushed all that stuff into cult status was the internet, and I think it was around in the 2000s. And then all of a sudden, I would see more and more hits related to me, and more hits related to his movies and the movies I did, and in 2008, because I was trying to put some reality shows together, and so I started a YouTube channel, and I talked about Wizard of Gore. What I discussed with you about how I ended up doing Wizard of Gore, as purely a fluke. And anyway, so I figured, well, I'll put that out and see how many hits I get. No, but I didn't get a lot of hits. The psychic woman, who I was doing a reality show for, this would-be psychic, she ended up with 30,000 hits off of a video where I just pointed a camera at her, and I actually had to stand off
that video.
Yeah,
you saw it. So ask you about that.
And I'm off to the side, reminding her about her predictions for that year. So you can hear my voice in it going and then what? And remember you said this, and remember you said that. Anyway, we had a couple ideas. The talk show with a transsexual, who's very famous here. We had, would be, but nobody at that point in time, 2008, now we probably could get made, but 2008, that wasn't very, that wasn't in the public eye. And, so then I talked to people that were doing, I talked to Herschel. I actually saw Herschel again. I went to a Canadian, it's not Comic-Con here. I don't know. It was Fantasia or something like comic, but it was a comic convention, and I saw Herschel there, and he was up there signing, autographs and all this stuff, and I'm going, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll do that. And I went, no, I'll just end up like people stalking me. So, and there weren't enough people in 2000, in that time period, there weren't enough people. Now, based on, if you watch it, how Comic-Con has grown and all these things. I mean, I go to PAX every year. PAX, the first year I went was like, it was like 50,000 people. Last year was 80,000 people. I mean, the fan bases are, just going exponentially. So now I'm thinking, well, maybe I will go back and I'll revisit doing some conventions. I was approached about doing conventions and stuff like that. I went, but I don't know how much cachet my name has anymore, or whether it has more cachet because more people are, that the fanboys have really picked up on this stuff and are really, promoting this kind of genre material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go to a lot of conventions here in the United States, and we have a good time and stuff. But yeah, if you'd ever be interested, I could look into for you if anybody would be interested. I know they are trying to get Herschel at a lot of them, but I don't think he does conventions anymore.
Well, he did. He was doing them. Maybe he doesn't anymore, but he was doing them because I saw him at one. It was somewhere between I think maybe 2009, 2010, and I saw him at one, and he was doing signings. I mean, but now now it's big names are coming. Rita's from Walking Dead is here, and the captain from Star Trek, he shows up, and lots of big people show up. Mm-hmm. So it's no longer just people that are hungry. It's about building a profile. So I'm into it. But I mean, what Herschel did, and Herschel was very good at the beginning of this whole thing because we talked about. He had they would he said his favorite line was when they call him up, he'd say, "Well, book me a room and send me a ticket." And that and if they weren't willing to do that, he says, "I don't show up." Mm-hmm. So he's never shown up for free, and I think he takes pretty much all the money from signing autographs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're aware, but he actually has a new film that's coming out this year.
I saw he was going to do. I knew he was going to do something. Mm-hmm. But and we didn't. When we were doing Lee's film, we didn't see each other at that point because he was working different days. I just came into Ottawa for 2 days, and he was working he came in after me, so we didn't get a chance to connect. But I knew that I had heard that I think through Lee that he was going to do something.
Back to the horror.
So he's going to be a part of an anthology series, and he's going to be, kind of like obviously not the Crypt Keeper. He won't be all made up, but that will be his primary role in the film. And then he's involved. I think directing.
I think he's directing one of the.
Two.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it like a sequel or something to Blood Feast?
He did that a few years ago, Blood Feast 2, but the new one coming out in 2015 is Blood Mania.
Okay. Yeah, the only rumor I heard was that he wasn't entirely satisfied with the way Blood Feast 2 turned out. That was the only rumor, I say, that I heard was that he wasn't entirely. So I hope he's going to do better with this one. But I know he just likes to do that. Mm-hmm. He'll probably never admit how much fun he has making these movies, but he does. He always, everybody had a good time. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, we had him on a few weeks ago, and he was pretty clear that he had a good time making these. So,
yeah.
I think that's why I went back. Now, you said your Halloween was really scary for you. What was it like to work with Jamie Lee Curtis on Terror Train?
She was really, she was one of the most professional actors I had worked with. And she really worked hard at, She worked very, she did a lot of her own physical work, a lot of stunt work on her own, and very serious. I mean, she wasn't one to goof around with. She was like serious. And she came to a few. When I assistant directed that show, I used to throw parties like every night because we were shooting on a real train and we didn't finish till like 3 a.m. and you're in Montreal. Even in Montreal, there was no place to go at 3 a.m. So I said, okay, everybody can come to my suite, and I did. The actors, extras, the crew, and my only stipulation was, well, when I'm going to go to sleep, I'll close the bedroom door, and you guys just, could stay here and sleep on the floor if you want, but just don't bother me. And so she would come. I'm trying to think who she was dating at the time. She was dating an artist or something like that. That was before Chris Guest. Chris Guest was shortly thereafter, though. It was like maybe a few years later. And so she came to a few of the parties, which was good. The only one that wouldn't come to my parties was David Copperfield, who was dating an actor on the show. And David would say, I said, David, why don't you come to my parties? Well, no, because him and his girlfriend would go off and, have alone time after shooting. So one day he says, I heard about your parties and how great they are, and I want to come. I said, well, David, it's late now. I mean, we're 2 weeks into shooting. I said, if you come, the only reason I'll let you in is if you bring a magic trick that you can show us all. So he comes and he does a card trick with a frame, and I've done card tricks. I mean, I started as how I ended up. There's to extrapolate. I got in the business as a child magician, and I've been and all this is and horror films especially. It's just the magic act. It's all the same thing. It's just we're going to fool you, and. But anyway, so I told Dave Copperfield, you got to come. Haven, by the way, was the name of the show I wanted to tell you that Josh ended up writing a script on. Anyway, so David comes, he does this fantastic trick. I mean, nothing, I couldn't figure it out. And then, I said, well, he says, I say, I do magic. Well, I do a lot of card magic and coin magic and stuff, a lot of close-up stuff. So we would go off into a corner, and I'm showing him some of my tricks, and he really liked it. He was pretty blown away. I was actually very flattered. He was pretty blown away by a couple of them. But then when he started to do some, his hands would flutter. And I figured, he was actually nervous showing close-up magic. And I thought, this is why he does big illusions, because it's intimidating doing close-up stuff for him. And, and each time he would show me something, like his hands would tremble. Now, what I have heard since is that he has bucked up his close-up magic stuff. And, now he's probably, incredible. But that was one of the best stories I had from that was when he actually came in. And I've gone to see his shows since and stuff like that. But and a lot of actors, directors, producers. If you go like to the Magic Castle in L.A., they're all there. There's if you want to meet somebody in Hollywood, get a membership to Magic Castle or find somebody that can get you in. And you'll see all sorts of people there because they're all former magicians.
Now, did you use any of your childhood magician, the way you moved and stuff for Montag?
No, actually, I was awful, and this was the funny thing because I told Herschel I was a magician, and then every trick he'd give me, like the one where I had the cup and I had to turn it over and the water didn't come out. I couldn't do any of those. Because I think what Herschel didn't quite get is that you got practice. Magic, I have the only discipline I ever got in my life was from doing magic, because you have to practice and practice and practice, and that's it. So he just throws this stuff at me that I have to do on stage, and I could, I think I had to do a thing with ropes, I had to do a thing with the cup, and whatever, and all of it was like. And he'd say, Ray, I thought you were a magician. I said, Herschel, you do this stuff. Yeah, so it didn't help me actually. The only thing I did have was I think what I did bring was the swagger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I knew how you perform on stage.
Uh-huh.
That sort of that there's a showmanship aspect, and I think that I provided, and some bad acting. But
I'm a big fan.
But that was only. Although I hear everybody says I was better than Crispin Glover, so I'm gratified.
Uh-huh.
And I have and believe me, I have the highest respect for Crispin. I don't know what happened to Crispin Glover. He was on fire when he started.
Yeah.
He was in Back to the Future and all. I mean, he was on fire. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. It's not the same. It's not the same performance as Montag, but I do enjoy Crispin's performance as Montag as well.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. No, I'm glad because it's not like the guy's untalented. So and believe me, he had. I'm sure he had a little more time to rehearse than I did. So I'm sure that is. I've never seen the second one, so I don't know. I only go to what people tell me or what they write up. And you get comments about stuff, and they're saying.
Yeah.
Various fans are making their choices about who they like better and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why they made it, but I actually do like Crispin in it. His delivery of his lines in it are just so peculiar that it's just so odd that it really makes me laugh. He has all these strange pauses every time he says anything. It's kind of like you're saying, like this, having the swagger of the magician on stage, and I thought he did a good job.
Oh, good. Okay, well, maybe I'll watch it because I think the only reason I avoid it is because I just didn't want to be reminded of that movie because it wasn't a movie that I felt I deserved. It was a movie that it was a fluke that I ended up doing it, and I didn't audition for the part. I didn't try. I didn't go through any of the excruciating, painful experiences that I could go through. And there I was. But Ron Oliver and I. You know who Ron Oliver is?
No.
He wrote Prom Night.
Okay.
He wrote Prom Night 3.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he wrote Prom Night 2. He wrote and directed Prom Night 3. And we also did a movie called Liar's Edge, which I thought was good. It was kind of sort of very Baroque suspense thriller, and very suitably odd. Not odd enough. We should have, when we finally decided that we should go really odd with this. It was like we were already halfway into the movie, and I went like, oh God, I wish we had done this from the beginning. But Ron, was a working director. He lives in Palm Springs, and he's brilliant writer and brilliant in directing, and he's a big genre guy. And his Prom Night 2 was very, very good and very shootable, and his Prom Night 3 was the first thing he directed. Mm-hmm. And we were going to do Wizard of Gore together. He was going to write it, and I was going to play it. And we had that idea, like, what year was that? Late 80s or something? Mm-hmm. We were thinking that. So it just didn't happen. There's another movie I'd like to do, which is kind of a horror, alien suspense horror film. And we were also interested in that. But, a lot of times you get interested in this stuff, and you don't have the money to buy the property. Mm-hmm. There was a book called Stinger we were really interested in. It was a sci-fi thing. It happened in a small town, Texas, with... I'm still interested. It still haunts me that, there's those things you didn't do, mm-hmm. and they haunt you because you didn't do them. And I think we did look into the rights at one point, but they're probably available now. Probably nobody's doing it. Yeah. And it's about an alien craft that lands in a small town in Texas where you have the Hispanics and the white trash at war with each other, mm-hmm. until the alien spaceship lands in the ground, and then all of a sudden they unite. So it was we were very attracted to that premise.
Mm-hmm. Would the Wizard of Gore you guys did in the 80s, would it have been a sequel, or would it have been like a remake of the original one?
No, he would have. No, it wouldn't be a remake. He would generate new material because he's a like I say, he's a very good writer, and I think his best stuff hasn't even been made as a movie yet. He's done a lot of. He's had to work, so he's done I think the last thing he did was Beethoven, was one of the Beethoven sequels. So he got very well recognized for it. But his other stuff, he was always trying to remake Rear Window. I mean, Paul Lynch, the director, is always trying to remake Clute. Every movie we would do, I'd be working with him on, either as a producer or assistant director, would be, let's do this movie like Clute. I'm going Paul, we've been doing all these movies like Clute. So I said, people get in their minds. So, I mean, I know Ron's working on a script, and he won't tell anybody what it is, but I would bet dollars to donuts it's some kind of take on Rear Window.
Did you see the remake of the movie Maniac?
There was a remake of Maniac?
Yeah. Check it out. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
I didn't see the first Maniac. I'll bet you my daughter has. I did a TV series which was based on urban tales, which was a little too ahead of its time, called Mania, and Mania they were urban legends that we made into a 4-part series. They were actually, I would say, at least 2 out of the 4 are pretty damn scary. But we couldn't really, it was way early in terms of finding any broadcasters that would take on 4 shows. Plus, it was pretty raw stuff. I mean, it was sexually and violence-wise, it was pretty raw. Mm-hmm. That's why I always tell people that are doing horror films in America, you always have to have violence and sex together. It's the American way. You don't necessarily have to have it here in Canada for this, but nobody here. But no, there's always, if you go all the way back through early America, you'll find there's always that crossing of sex and violence. And I've never seen that really in any other kind of. In I haven't seen that in you go look at the Japanese horror films. They don't do that. No. So it's very specific to America.
Arts and violence. Have you noticed that? There's a lot of Asian movies that have gas and poop and farts. And it's very weird. What was the movie that we saw? Something about a toilet?
It was Zombie Ass. Was the name of the movie?
Ass.
Yeah. Well,
was that an American movie?
No, it was an Asian movie.
I think it was Japanese or Korean. It was an Asian movie, and then there was an Asian bit in the first ABCs of Death, and it was all about farts. It's so strange. So I'd rather stick with my American sex and death than farts and death.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think they did. There's, the Asian horror that actually escapes to America is not. There was one really great one. It was one we were referencing when we were doing the Marsh. Was also, or I was anyway. It was about a blind girl who could see and had visions and was just brilliant. It was and that was like a nail biter. That had its own sense of terror to it. It actually is. The ending actually, I remember, was it starts out sort of suspenseful and then it really merges right into a really class act horror film. I just can't remember the name of it, but it was one of them that we were referencing.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
Because that was part of that explosion, and I think that that explosion was good for the market.
Mm-hmm.
The Asian explosion of horror.
When you're working on...
Because there wasn't really... Go ahead.
I was, when you do Prom Night 2 through 5, how different is it to work on a franchise of movies as opposed to individual movies? Do you treat them each as an individual?
Every one of them every one of them except that they had a party or a prom in it was different. You just have to have a prom or a party or something like that, to make it work. The Prom Night 5 actually was called The Club and was shot in an old, like a castle here. It's not an old castle. It's a castle that was like built in the 20s or something, but it's a castle. And they use it on rain a lot, or they were using it on rain. And it was called The Club. So it was less of a prom night vehicle, but it was originally called Prom Night 5. That was the original intention. Prom Night 4 was totally different in terms of, it actually didn't have, all it had was that, I think it was prom night, and then there was a gathering at a house, and in the house was a body count. That was fun to work with. That was really good to work with. That was with a director who was having a bad time with his career, and actually Paul Lynch came to me and said, you should take a chance on this guy. This guy's, really good. He's just having a bad bump. And I remember what I told him. I said, look, I'm going to give you this shot. I said, it's a 20-day shoot. I said, we got, it has to be tickety-boo. We have to come in on time, on budget, and we have to scare people. I said, you can play the game, and I'll be the first person that you see on the way up. Or you don't play the game, and I'm the last person you're going to see on the way down. Mm-hmm. So I said, it's up to you. Mm-hmm. And he knocked it out of the park. Clay Borison knocked it out of the park. Really, really well done show for, what it was, but it was a $1.6 million budget, which nobody was doing at that time. It was like, we did non-union actors, and all of them went out and had careers. I mean, that was, that's it. I know of most of them right now, actually, but where they are and what they're doing. And Joe Weiner ended up writing, and the one with Brad Pitt and Julia Roberts about the gun. And he was just an actor in the movie. He was a great lead actor. He was very good actor. And Nikki DeBoer was in it. Nikki did a lot of. She was in Haven, and she's done a lot of sci-fi stuff.
So how does it feel to be? It sounds like you really enjoy the mentorship role. Have you done any teaching? Have you done talks at colleges? I'm looking at. I might do that. I was looking at doing sort of a visiting professorship at Ryerson here, which now has exploded into the go-to school. That but it's very it's tough. Like, I can talk to you obviously endlessly, but it's tough putting this into a curriculum that you're actually going to test people on, because we have this thing about the movie business, and we make it look like it's a black art, and that it's something not everybody can do. I mean, I once did a movie with Robert Altman. This was I was late teens, and I got a part on one of his last thing he ever did on television, and I knew nothing. I mean, I was in theater school, and you weren't supposed to go do anything off the campus, and blah blah blah. And so there I am. I'm playing. I'm a teen in a gang, and the other guys in the gang, three of them are also from the school, but nobody's told anybody about it, because we get thrown out of school because we cut. This is what I think about schools, because we get thrown out for actually working professionally and having SAG contracts. So that's sort of what I think about schools. But anyway, I mean, the thing that I remember about most was that I was supposed to do a stunt, and he says, yeah, well, we're going to do a scene in the bar, and then we're going to come on. We're doing this big fight scene in the alley, and I said, I don't know, I didn't know, I can't do that. He says, no, he says, you see this guy over there? And there's a guy who had to be like, at that time in his, early 30s, who's almost a dead ringer for me. And he says, he's going to do the stunts.
you're just going to end up lying on the ground. So I went, oh, okay. And then I talked to Alvin because I was interested in directing. I said, I really want to direct. And he was very gracious with his time. He said, oh, well, come. He says, I'm in town. He says, we can talk over the weekend if you're around. So I went and saw him, and he says, the key thing he said was, don't go to film school. He said, get a job in a studio, pick up a broom, whatever. Start at the bottom and do that. And that was his advice. And that's what I did. And that's the advice I took. And I ended up at PBS when I walked away from acting. I was TTW in Chicago. So that's sort of how I ended up here.
Mm-hmm. Someone who's been through the rise of VHS and DVD and Blu-ray and everything, how do you think Netflix and Redbox has changed the world of movies?
I think Netflix absolutely changed the game. I think that, and it's interesting, but they also still have their delivery service with DVDs. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think they're keeping the DVD business between them and Redbox, keeping the DVD business alive. I mean, it's really a sort of a no-win situation. It's going to. There's a few, really collectors that want to have they want to own something. I mean, I'm for it. I have DVDs, I have Blu-rays because I actually want to own something. I don't want something that could disappear off the internet one day without me knowing. And then, I've invested in something and then it's gone. So all you're really buying, even with, and I did buy Interview. You're buying ones and zeros. That's all you're buying. You're buying nothing. That's why, they made such a killing. If I was going to talk about Netflix, I'd say Netflix, there wouldn't have been this ability to do the Interview as a day and date thing, which I predicted day and date since 1992, I think it was. And I was looking at it as the fastest way to make profit and to actually pay your negative costs on a movie. So I've said this that you have an audience of young filmmakers that this is breakthrough. It's not going to happen all at once. I'm usually still go slower than I always want to go, but the same with Oculus. Oculus first be picked up by gamers, and people are going to have to experiment to figure out how to make movies using Oculus. But once they do, it will be, because I've done Oculus, it's absolutely the most absorbing technology out there. But Netflix broke it open for all of this. Netflix, basically, and how I got into this whole idea was that I was in a hotel room in L.A. We were, what were we editing? It was a thing with Corey Haim called Blown Away. And the editor was there, and I was trying to satisfy MPAA because, my boss, Peter Simpson, says, well, we keep sending them cuts and they keep rejecting it. And I said, the only way we're going to do it is I'm going to go down to L.A. with the editor, and we're going to sit there until they accept the cut. We'll just go frame by frame if we have to until we get, because otherwise we would have had an X rating. So, and that's what we did. And I was in a very nice hotel there on Sunset, and they were one of the first hotels that had this ability to see movies on demand. Not, you can only see it at 9:20, at 11:10, at 3:15, but you could see it whenever you wanted. It was like one of the first of it. I'm assuming it was done by satellite, one of the first of the satellite feed kind of things, and. So that tweaked me, and I went like, well, sooner or later, everybody's going to want this way of watching movies. I mean, why would you want to wait? And also, I was watching maybe second-run movies, like 3 or 4 weeks after their run. Mm-hmm. So I went like, this is going to be the future. And I said, now, if they would only take those movies and also release, at that time, DVD was just starting, release a VHS and a DVD on the same day, and then run it theatrically, you could make your whole cost of the movie back in one weekend. And that's exactly what Interview's done. Mm-hmm. So it's just been a long time coming. But I was always, and I would say this to people, I would tell people, this is what you should be doing. But it's been a fight with the theater owners to get this through. It's only now, because of a sort of a fluke, that it's happened. And then it will become eventually ubiquitous, but it's going to be there'll be a couple more next year, or this year there'll be 3 or 4 more day and dates, and then there'll be 10 the following year, and 20, 30, 40. And it'll go pretty fast.
Yeah, I know there's actually some people who don't believe that that anyone was preventing the interview to be released. That they just did all of this on purpose. So who knows? But
I don't think they're. I would love to say they're that clever, but I don't think it was. I think what they did do was they were smart enough to take advantage of a bad situation. Mm-hmm. It's called there's opportunity in chaos, and they redeemed themselves. I mean, Lyndon and Amy, they really redeemed themselves with that quick decision. And that was a pretty shoot from the hip, but it was almost like, well, they would have, I would say they would have been persona non grata at Sony. I mean, they were the most lambasted of the whole batch at Sony, and really a lot of it was directed at them. But I think that they redeemed themselves by all of a sudden saying, well, we'll go day and dates. It was sort of like, I don't think they really thought it out, big time. I don't think it was always in the plan. I think it was just like, well, they had done, if Soderbergh had done something day and date or done something pre a theatrical release. Soderbergh was really pioneering day and date, and it didn't work out that well with him. I think Girlfriend Influence was originally a good day and date thing, but they just seized the day. They just all of a sudden saw that opportunity because the theater owners had rejected it. If the theater owners hadn't played into that, they would reject it. And the theater owners were doing it on a purely selfish basis and I know that the other studios played into this because the other studios went to the theater owners and said, you can't run this movie because somebody's threatening to bomb theaters. And we're opening we're opening Into the Woods, we're opening all these Christmas movies. It's our biggest one of our biggest box office weeks, and you're going to run basically a one theater movie in a multiplex and endanger 11 to 12 other ones. I'm sure the pressure was more on, the theater owners don't talk about that, but that really is the pressure. Mm. Because the studios could play real nasty with you in terms of letting you have their films. So, I think that was a part of it. It just happened to be, the perfect storm, and all of a sudden they were able to do this. I mean, I don't know that they've made back. So the movie cost about 40, and they probably spent already prior to that about maybe 40 to 50 on prints and ads. So they probably still aren't in total recoupment, but the way I'm looking at it is that the recoupment, because it's on video, because it's on the internet. Well, there's no prints. There's no, you don't have to have a theater. You don't have to have a projectionist. You don't have to split it with, you only have to do the split with the Amazon or whoever's running it. It's definitely less, less intense in terms of what you have to provide. So from that standpoint, and I think everybody's looking at that too, saying, "What? I mean, what is Netflix delivering? A bunch of ones and zeros, movie fare for people that want it." But there will be more to follow, more Netflixes. They won't be the only ones. They're only making marginal. I mean, they're making profits, but they're not making massive profits because they also. I think the business Netflix is in has nothing to do with movies. I think they're in data mining. Mm-hmm. Did you like this movie? How many stars would you give it? What movies do they track? What movies you watch? They've got a huge machine to do this, like a 500. I don't know, it's like $50 million machine or something to track data on their subscribers, mm-hmm. all across the world. So you don't think that's sellable material?
Mm-hmm. Does Netflix itself, does that hurt the theater? Do you think? Do you think if they start to do day and date, like you said, would less people actually go to the theater? Or do you think people always go to the theater?
I think eventually, yes, it would. The theaters aren't wrong in their protest that eventually it will hurt the theaters. It also puts a lot of pressure on the theaters to demand from the studios that they make better product.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be very helpful in many ways. It also means that theaters have to do more upgrading to make people want to go there, make it more of an experience for them. Because like when I watched the interview, it was on Christmas Day, and there were like seven family members there, and if we just spent it came down to about, I bought it so I'd have it, and so it comes down to about $2 a piece.
Exactly. Yeah.
To see, as opposed to you go to a movie, you get a babysitter, you pay gas, you park, you buy popcorn, you try to make a whole night out of it because you're out. So from that standpoint, yeah, it could cut into the revenue. I think other medias will cut into it. I think the company will watch is what Facebook does with all this.
Mm-hmm.
I think when Facebook bought Oculus, I thought that was definitely a signal. I had heard about Oculus only 4 months before that, or 3 months before that, and I was trying to find out where can I get a beta headset and try it out and all this stuff. And the next thing you know, Zuckerberg was buying the whole company for it was like $2 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So. They're going to do something with it. Facebook is going to use that. So it's really about more about media than it is about product.
Mm-hmm. You seem like somebody really tries to stay on top of new technology and new ways movies will be seen. And is that something you think you have to do if you want to work in?
Yeah, I think you definitely, if you snooze, you lose, and also because the stuff is coming. Even my son said this, and he's a teenager, and he says, there's something new every day, and he's right. There's a new app, there's a new this, there's a new headset, there's a new, there's a new streaming service, there's a new, just start looking at how exponentially all this has increased. I mean, if you look at even when I did my channel on YouTube, which is 2008, and YouTube contacted me and said, well, you want to do revenue sharing with me? And I'm going like, revenue sharing for what? This is just really, the hottest thing they had on there was Smosh. Mm-hmm. Now, what you're seeing is that Freddie Wong, Smosh, Rooster Teeth, these guys are all getting into the movie business. And this is all because they've come out of the YouTube experience and developed their own brands, and now they now can operate more successfully in the media, and they don't have to make stuff that's 5 minutes long or 10 minutes long. They can now actually they can crowdfund their movies. They can that's a big part of the breakthrough aspects of the media business is that you can crowdfund.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know people crowdfunding, and I know it's working.
Yeah. Even
how do you feel about someone Rob Zombie's fairly well known at this point for his films? How do you feel, and his music? How do you feel about someone like Rob Zombie using crowdfunding to make a film?
Someone's already established.
Well, I think it depends on the project. I think that obviously Rob is not everybody's cup of tea. I personally, and I would say that was probably one of my fan favorites was 1,000 Corpses. Not so much the other one, although I still play. What was the second one you did?
Devil's Rejects.
Sort of like a sequel to it.
Devil's
What was
Rejects.
it? Devil's. Now I still play, and I will show other people, and I'll say, look, we're going to watch the last car ride in Devil's Rejects.
Mm-hmm.
For how it was cut, for how they used the music, how they used the score, how they did the special effects. Every aspect of that ending is fulfilling. That's probably one of the best endings I've seen on any movie anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would crowdfund him, and I think he probably did for $1.98 and all you can eat. So yeah, he probably does need the money to get these things off the ground. There's probably not a lot of people that want to, invest in it. I don't think Devil's Rejects did as well as 1,000 Corpses, which was brilliant. Actually, was as probably to me as scary as Texas Chainsaw. Almost on that level. When they started going down to that basement and all, I went like, holy shit. So
something that was a criticism was that there was so much of that Texas Chainsaw Massacre to the point where people felt it was like a ripoff in some ways. How do you feel about that?
I didn't, you know what, because the Tobe Hooper version was so long ago that, and I know that, you know, I mean, I didn't see the latest version, but I heard it wasn't all that great.
Yeah, you know.
So I can't compare it to that.
Uh-huh.
I can only compare, like, I'm very black and white. Did you scare the shit out of me? If you did, I don't care how you did. Everything is derivative in this business. I mean, comedies, everything is derivative. I mean, I can go through the 24 plots that exist. There's only 24. We just do, you know, we just take old wine in new bottles. That's all. So it's not like anything is going to be breakthrough. And I think, you know, I would consider it a homage to, I never, when I was watching it, I never thought Texas Chainsaw. It was only, you know, years later I went like, wow. The only other film I saw that was quite that crawly was Texas Chainsaw, which actually made your skin crawl. You know, but I think I think if it was, you know, I think he went beyond Texas Chainsaw. I think he took it to another level. You know, I think his integration of the characters was a better integration of characters. I think, you know, Texas Chainsaw, I rarely got, you know, the family could have been like stand-ins or walk-ons, but Rob Zombie's, those are real characters. So, you know, I give him that. I think Devils didn't quite become, you know, it has some exceptional scenes in there. It had the motel scene you know, stands out in memory and like that. And that ending is like, I mean, you know, you could teach that to film students to say, like, because you got to, you know, if you don't deliver an ending, like, what have you done? That's the problem with Blair Witch, is that Blair Witch never, you know, and did, you know, in spite of itself, did exceptionally well, but never had an ending. And it was a bit of disappointment. If that actually had an ending, it would have been like, you know, they'd still be playing it.
So is that really a sticking point for you in a film, is kind of that leave it up in the air ending to any given film or story? Were you talking about leaving something up in the air? Yeah, that film, you don't really know what happens. And there's other films where you it's in your imagination, where does it end up? I'm not big on open endings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, open endings have always open endings bother me. I mean, I can understand open ending with the idea that, you know, my God, if we get lucky, there could be a sequel, and I think you should definitely leave that possibility, like Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, they left that the potential that this can come back. Another one that scared the crap out of me was, I think it was Clive Barker's, the Pin Man, and I still watch that. I mean, it was, you know, I mean, I watch it now, I'm going like, oh, this is really pretty tawdry the way they did it. But on the other hand, it had stuff in there nobody had seen before. So I'll give them that. And it had an ending. And, you know, and I think it's important, like in a horror film, to have somewhat of a closed ending. It can't be, they're still out there. It has to be, well, you know, we supposedly have killed this, so it won't be coming back. But maybe. You know, but I've never, in any of the genre forms, I'm not big on open endings. I think it's, you know, it's pseudo art. I did a lot of this in the 70s and 80s, you know, when there were doing more nihilistic movies and stuff like that. That you looked at those movies and it's not satisfying. An audience wants, I mean, because basically what we're doing is we're doing fairy tales. We're doing, you know, we're doing gothic fairy tales. We're doing, you know,
and they all had endings. Most fairy tales actually had happy endings. So there's always there's a closure in a fairy tale. There's a closure in a myth, even if it ends negatively. It's not like, oh, and they're going to be, Oedipus is blind. He's, he realizes mistakes and he goes away. That's an ending. Mm-hmm. So they've been doing endings for a long time, and when you say, "Oh, well, we'll break with it," I think what will actually have the biggest impact on how we write and how we direct movies will be Oculus. I think because of its media, that you're going to have to learn how to shoot that mm-hmm. shots that you used in standard movie making and filmmaking television are not going to have that kind of impact. That it's much more of younger people I'm mentoring, we talk about like, well, how wood is it? It's kind of like in the round. I mean, it's in one sense, it's like you could do it sort of in the round, like from any perspective. When you go see in the round theater, from any perspective, it looks good. It's I think where we'll end up with it is somewhat like in gaming when you couldn't. This is my latest theory, and these are all theories. My latest theory is that in gaming, you want to go over that hill. Well, no, they ran out of data, so you can't go over that hill. You can only stay on the lane. You can't drive your car all the way over there. So it'll be sort of that way with Oculus, that there'll be a certain boundaries in terms of where you can go and what you can do.
I want to thank you for being on, Ray. It's been great talking to you.
Okay. Where can I hear this? So where do I go?
No, it'll be on Without Your Head.
And it's like...
This is Jeremy Caston, and you're listening to WithoutYourHead.com. And you are sick.